The dust settled on the porch of the general store where Catherine Hayes stood with her carpetbag at her feet, watching the wagon that carried her husband of 8 years disappear down the rutted road toward Santa Fe, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would never see Thomas Hayes again. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small town of Silver Ridge, New Mexico Territory, in this summer of 1878, and Catherine felt every bit as scorched as the dry earth beneath her worn boots. She was 30 years old, alone, and according to the man who had just abandoned her, utterly worthless because her womb had failed to produce the sons he demanded. 5 pregnancies in 8 years, and each one had ended in heartbreak. 3 miscarriages that left her bleeding and broken, and 2 stillborn babies that she had labored for hours to bring into a world they would never see. Thomas had grown colder with each loss, his disappointment hardening into resentment, and finally into the kind of contempt that made a man pack his belongings and ride away without so much as a backward glance. Catherine pressed her hand against her flat stomach, remembering the doctor's words just 3 weeks ago. No more children, he had said. The last miscarriage had done too much damage. Her body simply could not carry a baby to term. When she had told Thomas that evening, he had stared at her across the dinner table with eyes as cold as a January frost, then stood and walked out of their small house without saying a word. She should have known then what was coming. The proprietor of the general store, Mr. Hutchinson, cleared his throat behind her. "Mrs. Hayes, I hate to press you at a time like this, but your husband settled his account this morning. Said you would be leaving town as well." Catherine turned to face him, forcing herself to stand straight despite the exhaustion that weighted her limbs. "I have nowhere to go, Mr. Hutchinson. Thomas made it very clear that he was leaving alone." The older man's weathered face creased with sympathy, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. Sympathy did not pay rent or put food on tables. "I am sorry for your troubles, truly I am. But the room above the store that you and Mr. Hayes occupied, well, I have another family interested in renting it." Of course he did. Living space was scarce in Silver Ridge, a town that had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains 5 years ago. Catherine nodded slowly, her mind racing through her limited options. She had exactly $12.30 to her name, the sum total of the egg money she had saved over the past year. Thomas had taken everything else. "I understand," she said quietly. "I will collect my things and be out within the hour." She climbed the narrow stairs to the 2 rooms that had been her home for the past 3 years, since Thomas had given up farming and taken a job as a clerk for the mining company. The space was already half emptied, Thomas having taken everything he considered his. What remained were her clothes, a few cooking implements he had not wanted, a quilt her mother had made before she died, and a daguerreotype of her parents that was the only family heirloom she possessed. Catherine packed methodically, her hands steady even as her mind whirled with uncertainty. She was educated, which was unusual for a woman of her circumstances. Her father had been a schoolteacher before consumption took him when she was 16, and he had insisted that both Catherine and her younger brother learn to read and write and cipher. Her brother had died at Gettysburg in 1863, and her mother had followed him 6 months later, her heart simply giving out from grief. Catherine had been alone then too, at 20, and Thomas Hayes had seemed like salvation when he courted her with pretty words and promises of a good life. What a fool she had been! She carried her bags downstairs and set them on the wooden sidewalk outside the store. Mr. Hutchinson was serving a customer and pointedly did not look in her direction. Catherine understood. She was a woman alone now, no longer protected by the respectability of marriage, and people would be quick to distance themselves from her. The taint of scandal spread faster than wildfire in a small town. The hotel was her first thought, but she knew that $12 would not last long paying for a room and meals. She needed work, and she needed it immediately. The problem was that there were precious few respectable jobs available for women in Silver Ridge. She could sew, but there was already a seamstress in town. She could cook and clean, but most of the miners did their own cooking or ate at the boarding house run by Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Chen had all the help she needed from her own large family. Catherine walked slowly down the main street, very aware of the eyes that followed her. News traveled fast in small towns, and by now everyone would know that Thomas Hayes had left his barren wife behind like so much unwanted baggage. She held her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shame. The Last Chance saloon loomed ahead, its painted sign garish in the afternoon light. Catherine had never set foot inside a saloon in her life, but she knew they employed women. She also knew what kind of work those women did, and the thought made her stomach turn. But what choice did she have? She could either sell her body or starve, and those seemed to be her only options. She was still standing on the sidewalk, gathering her courage to push through the swinging doors, when a voice spoke behind her. "You planning on going in there, ma'am?" Catherine turned and found herself looking up at one of the tallest men she had ever seen. He was lean and broad-shouldered, dressed in dusty trail clothes and a worn leather vest. A battered hat shaded his face, but she could see sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He was young, probably not much older than she was, and he was looking at her with an expression of concern that seemed genuine. "I do not believe that is any of your business," Catherine said, more sharply than she intended. The last thing she needed was another man telling her what to do. The stranger held up both hands in a placating gesture. "No offense meant, ma'am. It is just that a lady like yourself does not usually frequent such establishments, and I thought perhaps you might be lost or in some kind of trouble." "What makes you think I am a lady?" Catherine asked bitterly. "Perhaps I am exactly the sort of woman who belongs in a saloon." Something shifted in the man's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I have been around enough to know the difference between a woman who chooses that life and one who is considering it out of desperation. You have the look of someone who has run out of options, and that is a look I know well." Despite herself, Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "As I said, it is none of your business." "Maybe not," the man agreed, "but I am making it my business anyway. My name is James Cordell, and I own a ranch about 10 miles north of here. I came into town to hire some help, and it seems to me that you might be looking for work." Catherine stared at him. "You want to hire me? To do what?" "I need someone to cook and keep house," James said. "My ranch is not much, just a small spread with about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. I have 3 men working for me, and they are good cowhands but terrible cooks. We have been living on beans and burned bacon for the past 6 months, ever since my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, went back to Mexico to live with her daughter. The men are threatening to quit if I do not find someone who can prepare a decent meal." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Catherine crossed her arms over her chest. "Why would you offer a job to a complete stranger on the street?" "Because you look like you need one, and I have a position that needs filling," James said simply. "Also, Mrs. Hutchinson at the boarding house told me about your situation when I asked if she knew anyone looking for work. She said you were a good cook and a hard worker, and that your husband was a fool for leaving you." Catherine was surprised. She had not thought Mrs. Hutchinson even knew who she was, beyond being another woman in town. "She said that, she did," James confirmed. "She also said that you were facing some hard choices, and that someone ought to help you before you did something you would regret. So here I am, offering help." It was more charity than Catherine's pride could easily accept, but her pride would not keep her fed or sheltered. "What are the terms of employment?" $20 a month plus room and board," James said. "You would have your own cabin, small but private. You would be responsible for cooking 3 meals a day for me and the 3 ranch hands and keeping the main house clean. Laundry is your choice." I can pay extra if you are willing to take it on, or the men can do their own. It is hard work, but honest work, and I promise you would be treated with respect. $20 a month was a fair wage, more than fair really. Catherine knew women who worked much harder for much less. And you expect nothing else from me? Just cooking and cleaning? James met her eyes directly. Just cooking and cleaning. I am not the kind of man who takes advantage of women in difficult situations, Mrs. Hayes. You would be an employee, nothing more, and I would expect my men to treat you accordingly. Any man who behaves otherwise would be off my ranch within the hour. Catherine wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him, because the alternative was walking through those saloon doors and losing whatever was left of herself. I will need a few days to consider your offer. Fair enough, James said, but I will be heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning at first light. If you decide to take the job, meet me at the livery stable at dawn. If you are not there, I will understand, and I wish you well either way. He tipped his hat to her and walked away, his long strides carrying him down the street toward the hotel. Catherine watched him go, her mind spinning. She did not know James Cordell, had never even heard his name before today. For all she knew, he could be a liar or worse. But something in his eyes had seemed honest, and Mrs. Hutchinson's recommendation meant something. Mrs. Hutchinson was a shrewd judge of character. Catherine picked up her bags and walked to the small church at the end of town. Reverend Walsh was a kind man who had visited her after each of her losses, offering comfort even when she had little comfort to give herself in return. Perhaps he would let her sleep in the church for the night while she decided what to do. The Reverend was more than willing. He made up a pallet for her in the small room behind the sanctuary and brought her a plate of food from his own supper. I heard about Thomas, he said quietly. I am sorry, Mrs. Hayes. No woman deserves such treatment. He wanted sons, Catherine said, staring at her plate. I could not give them to him. A child is a blessing, whether son or daughter, Reverend Walsh said firmly. And even if the Lord had seen fit not to bless your union with children at all, that would not have made you less valuable as a person or as a wife. Thomas Hayes is the one at fault here, not you. His words were kind, but they could not erase the hollow ache in Catherine's chest. She thanked him for the food and the shelter, and when he left, she lay down on the pallet and stared at the ceiling. Sleep was a long time coming. By the time the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Catherine had made her decision. She washed her face in the basin the Reverend had provided, tidied her hair as best she could, and changed into her least worn dress. She left $1 on the table for the Reverend's kindness, then picked up her bags and walked to the livery stable. James Cordell was already there, saddling a tall bay horse. When he saw her, a smile crossed his face. I am glad you came. I need the work, Catherine said, not wanting him to think she was there for any other reason. Understood, James said. He gestured to a sturdy-looking mare tied nearby. That is Rosie. She is gentle as a lamb and she will carry you to the ranch. Can you ride? I can, Catherine said. Her father had kept horses when she was young and she had ridden regularly until his death. It had been years, but she was confident she could manage. James helped her secure her bags to the saddle, then gave her a hand up. Catherine settled herself, adjusting her skirts and finding her seat. It felt good to be on horseback again, despite everything. James mounted his bay and led the way out of town, and Catherine followed, very aware of the eyes watching them leave. Let them watch, she thought. Let them gossip. She was doing what she had to do to survive. The ride to the ranch took about 2 hours, following a winding trail through scrubby grassland dotted with juniper and piñon pines. The land was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all tawny gold and rust red under an endless blue sky. James rode easily, clearly comfortable in the saddle, and he pointed out landmarks as they went. The creek that ran through his property, barely a trickle this time of year but reliable even in drought. The line of cottonwoods that marked the northern boundary of his land. The rocky outcropping where he had seen a mountain lion just last month. It is not easy country, he said. "But it is good country if you are willing to work with it instead of against it." Catherine understood what he meant. This was not the lush farmland of her childhood where rain fell regularly and crops grew thick. This was land that demanded respect and patience, but there was something appealing about that, something honest. The land did not lie or make false promises. It simply was what it was. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. It was modest, as James had said. A main house built of adobe with a wooden porch, a barn and several corrals, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and a small cabin set a short distance from the main house. Everything was well maintained but weathered. Speaking of hard work and limited resources, 3 men were working near the corral and they looked up as James and Catherine approached. James dismounted and helped Catherine down, then called the men over. "Boys, this is Mrs. Hayes. She is going to be our new cook and housekeeper. Mrs. Hayes, this is Frank, Miguel, and Charlie." Frank was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. Miguel was younger, dark-haired and dark-eyed with a ready smile. Charlie was the youngest, barely out of his teens, with red hair and more freckles than Catherine had ever seen on one person. "Ma'am," Frank said, touching the brim of his hat. The other 2 followed suit. "I expect you all to treat Mrs. Hayes with respect," James said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. "She has had a difficult time and she deserves better than she has been given. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect his pay and ride out." "No problem here, boss," Frank said. "We are just glad to have some decent food for a change." Miguel and Charlie nodded agreement, and Catherine felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. These seemed like good men, rough around the edges perhaps, but honest. James showed Catherine to the small cabin that would be hers. It was simple, just one room with a bed, a table and chair, a small stove, and a trunk for her belongings. But it was clean and private, and after the uncertainty of the past few weeks, it felt like a sanctuary. "Take some time to settle in," James said. "When you are ready, come to the main house and I will show you the kitchen. No need to start cooking until tomorrow. Tonight the boys can suffer through one more meal of beans." Catherine smiled despite herself. "Thank you, Mr. Cordell, James," he said. "We do not stand much on formality out here." "Then you may call me Catherine," she said. He smiled, and she noticed for the first time that he had a dimple in his left cheek. "Catherine it is. Welcome to the Cordell Ranch." After he left, Catherine unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on the pegs provided and storing her other items in the trunk. She made up the bed with her mother's quilt, and the familiar weight and scent of it brought tears to her eyes. So much had changed, so much had been lost. But she was still here, still standing, and that had to count for something. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then walked to the main house. The front door was open, and she knocked on the frame before entering. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a large main room with a stone fireplace, a few pieces of simple furniture, and doorways leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was dusty and cluttered, with the unmistakable air of a space occupied only by men who had no interest in housekeeping. The kitchen was through an archway to the left. It was a good-sized space with a large wood-burning stove, a sturdy table, open shelves holding dishes and supplies, and a dry sink with a hand pump. Catherine walked around, taking inventory. There was flour and cornmeal, beans and rice, salt pork and bacon, canned tomatoes and peaches, coffee and sugar. The basics were all there, and she could work with basics. "What do you think?" James asked from the doorway. "I think I can make something decent with what you have here," Catherine said. "I will need to know what time you want meals served and whether you have any preferences or restrictions." "Breakfast at dawn, lunch at noon, supper at dusk," James said. "No restrictions. We will eat whatever you put in front of us and be grateful for it. If you need anything from town, make a list and I will pick it up on my next trip." Catherine nodded. "I will have breakfast ready tomorrow morning at dawn." She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing surfaces and organizing supplies until everything was to her satisfaction. It felt good to work, to have a purpose and a place, even if that place was not what she had once imagined for herself. By the time the sun began to set, she was exhausted but satisfied. She returned to her cabin and lit the lamp, then sat on the edge of the bed. Through the small window, she could see the main house and the glow of lamplight from within. She could hear the low murmur of male voices and occasional burst of laughter. It was strange to be here, on this isolated ranch with 4 men she did not know, her entire life reduced to what she could carry in 2 bags. But it was also a relief. Here, no one knew the details of her failures. Here, she was simply the cook and housekeeper, valued for what she could do rather than judged for what she could not. It was not the life she had planned, but it was a life, and she would make the most of it. The next morning, Catherine was up well before dawn. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main house, where she built up the fire in the stove and started coffee. She found eggs in the cold box, along with a bit of bacon that was still good. She made biscuits from scratch, mixing the dough with practiced ease, and put together a breakfast that would stick to the ribs of working men. By the time the sky began to lighten, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and baking bread. The men arrived one by one, drawn by the scent, and their faces when they saw the spread she had laid out made all her effort worthwhile. "Ma'am, if this tastes half as good as it smells, we are in for a treat," Frank said, settling himself at the table. It tasted even better than it smelled, if the speed with which the men demolished everything she had prepared was any indication. Even James, who had struck her as a man of few words, offered sincere compliments on her cooking. "You were not exaggerating when you said you could cook," he said, accepting a second cup of coffee. "This is the best meal I have had in months." "It is nothing fancy," Catherine said, pleased despite herself, "just simple food done properly." "Sometimes simple is exactly what a person needs," James said, meeting her eyes across the table. Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, a small flutter of warmth that she quickly suppressed. She was not here to develop feelings for her employer. She was here to work, to earn her keep, and to build some kind of future for herself. Anything else would be foolish. But as the days turned into weeks, Catherine found it increasingly difficult to ignore the way James treated her. He was unfailingly kind, never speaking to her with anything other than respect. He asked her opinion on household matters and actually listened to her answers. He noticed when she was tired and suggested she take breaks. He brought her wildflowers once, a small bouquet of purple asters he had found growing by the creek, and set them on the kitchen table without explanation. The other men were respectful too, but there was something different about James. Something in the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. Something in the way he always seemed to be nearby when she needed help with a heavy pot or a stuck window. Catherine told herself she was imagining things. James Cordell was her employer, nothing more. He had given her a job when she desperately needed one, and she was grateful, but that did not mean anything beyond a business arrangement, except it was starting to feel like more. 2 months after Catherine arrived at the ranch, James asked her to accompany him to town for supplies. It was a warm September morning, the air just beginning to carry the first hint of autumn coolness. Catherine had a list of items she needed for the kitchen, and she welcomed the opportunity to get away from the ranch for a few hours. They rode side by side, the horses setting an easy pace. James was quiet at first, and Catherine was content to enjoy the scenery and the break from her routine. But after a while he spoke. "You have been here 2 months now," he said. "Are you settling in all right? Is there anything you need that you do not have?" "Everything is fine," Catherine assured him. "You have been more than fair with me." "I hope so," James said. "I know this is not what you expected from your life." Catherine glanced at him, surprised by the personal turn in the conversation. "None of us end up exactly where we expect to be." "True enough," James agreed. I certainly never planned to end up ranching in New Mexico territory. I grew up in Missouri on a farm outside of Independence. My father wanted me to take over the farm when he retired, but I wanted something different, something that was mine, not just inherited. So I came west in 1872, worked as a cowhand for a few years to learn the trade, and saved every penny I could. Bought this land in 1875, and I have been building it up ever since. It is a good ranch, Catherine said. You should be proud of what you have accomplished. I am, James said. But it is also lonely sometimes. I am not complaining, mind you. I knew what I was signing up for when I chose this life, but there are times when I wish I had someone to share it with. Catherine's heart began to beat faster. She told herself not to read too much into his words, but it was hard not to hope. Have you never been married? No, James said. I came close once back in Missouri. Her name was Sarah and we were engaged to be married. But she changed her mind at the last minute, said she could not see herself living on a farm for the rest of her life. She married a lawyer instead, someone who could give her a house in town and a comfortable life. I was hurt at the time, but looking back, I think she made the right choice. She would not have been happy with me, and I would not have been happy trying to be someone I was not. I am sorry, Catherine said. It must have been painful. It was, James admitted. But I survived, same as you are surviving what Thomas did to you. We are tougher than we think we are, most of the time. They rode in silence for a while, and Catherine thought about what he had said. She was surviving. More than that, she was starting to feel like herself again, like a person with value beyond her ability to produce children. It was a good feeling, fragile but growing stronger every day. In town, they went their separate ways to complete their errands. Catherine stopped at the general store to purchase flour and sugar and other kitchen staples. Mr. Hutchinson was polite but distant, and she could see the curiosity in his eyes. No doubt he was wondering about her relationship with James Cordell, and no doubt he would spread whatever conclusions he reached to anyone who would listen. She was leaving the store when she ran into Mrs. Chen from the boarding house. The older woman smiled warmly and took Catherine's hand. I am glad to see you looking well, Mrs. Chen said. I heard you were working for Mr. Cordell. I am, Catherine confirmed. He has been very good to me. He is a good man, Mrs. Chen said. Honest and hardworking, you could do much worse. Catherine felt her cheeks heat. It is just a job, Mrs. Chen. Of course it is, Mrs. Chen said, but her eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. But a job can become more if two people are willing to let it. Before Catherine could respond, Mrs. Chen patted her hand and walked away, leaving Catherine standing on the sidewalk feeling flustered and confused. Was it really so obvious that she was developing feelings for James? And if it was obvious to Mrs. Chen, was it obvious to James as well? She found James waiting by the horses, his own purchases secured in his saddlebags. They loaded Catherine's supplies and began the ride back to the ranch. The sun was high and hot, and Catherine was grateful for the shade of her hat. Can I ask you something? James said after they had been riding for about half an hour. Of course, Catherine said. Do you regret coming to work for me? I know some people in town probably talk, a single woman living on a ranch with 4 men. I do not want to damage your reputation. Catherine considered the question carefully. My reputation was already damaged when Thomas left me. As for regret, no, I do not regret it. You gave me a chance when I had none, and I will always be grateful for that. I am glad, James said. Because I have to confess, I am selfishly glad you took the job. The ranch is a better place with you in it. Catherine's breath caught. That is kind of you to say. It is the truth, James said. He slowed his horse and turned to look at her directly. Catherine, I know this might not be the right time, and you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. But I need you to know that I think Thomas Hayes was the biggest fool who ever lived. Any man who would leave you because you could not give him sons does not deserve you. You are worth so much more than that. Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes and she blinked them back furiously. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough, James said firmly. I know you are strong and capable. I know you work hard and never complain. I know you are kind to my men and patient with Charlie, even when he tracks mud all through your clean kitchen. I know you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted, and I know your smile lights up a room. That is more than enough for me to know you are someone special." "James," Catherine whispered, not sure what to say. "I am not asking for anything," James said quickly. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. You have been hurt, and the last thing I want is to make you uncomfortable or pressure you into anything. But I could not keep pretending I see you as just an employee. You are more than that to me, Catherine. Much more." Catherine stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and emotion. Thomas had courted her with pretty lies and empty promises, but James was offering her something real. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "You do not have to say anything," James told her. "Just think about it. And know that whatever you decide, you will always have a place at the ranch for as long as you want it. I meant what I said about respecting you, and I always will." They rode the rest of the way back in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Catherine's mind was whirling with possibilities and fears. She was drawn to James in a way she had never been drawn to Thomas, not even in the early days of their courtship. But she was also terrified. What if she let herself care for him and he changed his mind? What if he eventually came to resent her the way Thomas had, when he realized she could never give him children? That evening, after supper was cleared away and the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Catherine sat on the porch of her cabin and watched the stars come out. The night was clear and cool, the sky an endless expanse of black velvet studded with diamonds. She had never seen so many stars as she did out here, far from the lights of any town. She heard footsteps and looked up to see James approaching. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his hat in his hands. "I wanted to apologize if I made you uncomfortable earlier," he said. "I should not have said what I did. It was not fair to put you on the spot like that." "You did not make me uncomfortable," Catherine said. "You made me feel something I have not felt in a long time. You made me feel valued." James climbed the steps and sat down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You are valued, Catherine, more than you know." "There is something you need to understand," Catherine said, forcing herself to say the words that terrified her. "The doctor said I cannot have children. The damage from my last miscarriage was too severe. If you are hoping for a family, for sons to inherit your ranch, I cannot give you that. I will never be able to give you that." She waited for him to pull away, to take back everything he had said earlier. But instead, James reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I heard what you said that day on the porch in town," he said quietly. "When I first offered you the job, you said Thomas left you because you could not give him sons. And I have been wanting to tell you ever since that I do not care about that. I do not need sons, Catherine. I would rather have you." Catherine turned to stare at him, tears streaming down her face. "How can you say that? Every man wants children, wants someone to carry on his name." "Maybe some men do," James said, "but I am not every man. Yes, I thought about having a family someday, but that was always secondary to finding the right person to share my life with. And if that person cannot have children, then we will not have children. It does not change how I feel." "You say that now," Catherine said, her voice breaking, "but what about in 5 years or 10? What if you wake up one day and realize you have wasted your life on a barren woman who cannot give you what you really want?" James shifted closer and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "Look at me, Catherine. Really look at me. Do I look like a man who makes promises he does not intend to keep?" Catherine met his eyes, those clear blue eyes that had never looked at her with anything but kindness and respect. "No," she whispered. "Then believe me when I say I would rather have you than a dozen sons," James said. "You are what I want, just you exactly as you are." The kiss, when it came, was soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. Catherine answered it, leaning into James and feeling something inside her chest crack open and bloom. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not the desperate clinging she had felt with Thomas, but something solid and true and absolutely right. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. James rested his forehead against hers and sighed contentedly. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I am glad you did," Catherine said. They sat together on the porch for hours, talking about everything and nothing. James told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the breeding program he wanted to start with his horses. Catherine told him about her childhood, about her father's love of books and her mother's skill with a needle. They talked until the moon was high in the sky and the air had grown cold, and even then they were reluctant to part. "I should let you get some sleep," James said finally. "You have to be up early to make breakfast for a bunch of hungry cowboys." "I do not mind," Catherine said, "but you are right, we both need rest." James stood and helped her to her feet. He kissed her once more, a sweet, gentle kiss that promised more to come, then walked back to the main house. Catherine went into her cabin and got ready for bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Her mind was too full, her heart too light. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt genuinely happy. The next few weeks passed in a haze of joy and discovery. James and Catherine spent every moment they could together, learning each other's habits and preferences, sharing stories and dreams. They took rides together in the evening after supper, exploring the far reaches of the ranch. James showed her the places he loved best, a hidden valley where deer came to graze at dusk, a rocky overlook with a view that stretched for miles. The ranch hands noticed the change in their employer and his housekeeper, and they approved. Frank, who had been with James the longest, pulled Catherine aside one morning after breakfast. "I just want you to know that we are all happy for you and the boss," he said. "He has been alone too long and you are good for him. Good for all of us, really. This place feels more like a home now." Catherine was touched by his words. "Thank you, Frank. That means a great deal to me." "James is a good man," Frank continued. "The best I have ever worked for. He will treat you right, I promise you that." Catherine believed him. Every day, James showed her through his actions that he meant what he said. He was patient and kind, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. He helped her with the heavy work without being asked, carried water from the well, chopped wood for the stove. He brought her small gifts, pretty rocks he found on his rides, a book of poetry he picked up in town. He made her feel cherished in a way she had never felt before. In late October, James proposed. They were sitting by the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. The cottonwoods were turning gold and the air smelled of autumn leaves and dry grass. "Marry me," James said, taking her hand. "I know it has not been long and I know you might need more time, but I am sure about this, Catherine. I am sure about you. I want you to be my wife, not just my housekeeper. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life looks like." Catherine felt tears sting her eyes, but these were happy tears. "Are you absolutely certain? Because once we are married, there is no going back. You will be stuck with me, barren womb and all." "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life," James said. He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I want that woman to be you." Catherine took the ring with shaking hands. It fit perfectly on her finger as though it had been made for her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." James whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, and Catherine kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude she felt. They were married 3 weeks later, in the small church in Silver Ridge. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony, and the entire town turned out to witness it. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric James had bought her, a simple but elegant gown of deep blue wool. James wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaved. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears through the entire ceremony. Even Mr. Hutchinson from the general store seemed pleased, commenting that it was nice to see a story with a happy ending. Frank, Miguel, and Charlie sat in the front row, grinning like proud fathers. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them man and wife, James kissed Catherine with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. This was what she had been searching for all her life without knowing it. Not a man who wanted her for what she could provide, but a man who wanted her simply for herself. They held a small reception at the boarding house, with food provided by Mrs. Chen and her family. There was music and dancing, and Catherine laughed more than she had laughed in years. When it was time to leave, the ranch hands insisted on riding ahead to give the newlyweds some privacy. "We will see you tomorrow, boss," Frank said with a wink. "Take your time." James and Catherine rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. When they arrived, James helped Catherine down from her horse and carried her over the threshold of the main house, both of them laughing at the old tradition. That night, they consummated their marriage with gentleness and care. James was patient and attentive, making sure Catherine felt safe and loved every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in James's bed, which was now their bed, and talked until the early hours of the morning. "I never thought I could be this happy," Catherine whispered, her head resting on James's chest. "After Thomas left, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone, either working myself to death or selling myself just to survive. I never imagined this." "Neither did I," James said, stroking her hair. "But I am so grateful you took a chance on me, that you did not walk through those saloon doors that day." "I am grateful you stopped me," Catherine said. "You saved me, James." "We saved each other," James corrected. "This ranch was just a place before you came. You made it a home." The first year of their marriage was blissfully happy. Catherine threw herself into making the ranch house comfortable and welcoming. She sewed curtains for the windows, made cushions for the chairs, planted a garden in the spring with vegetables and herbs. James built her a chicken coop, and she filled it with hens that provided fresh eggs every morning. The ranch prospered under their joint care. James's breeding program began to show results, with several excellent foals born that spring. The cattle herd grew, and James was able to hire 2 more men to help with the increased workload. Catherine cooked for everyone, and the ranch house kitchen became the heart of the operation, a place where men gathered not just to eat but to talk and laugh and feel part of something larger than themselves. But despite their happiness, Catherine could not completely escape the shadow of her past. There were moments when she would see James playing with Charlie's nephew, a toddler who sometimes visited the ranch, and she would feel a sharp pang of loss. There were times when she would wake in the night from dreams of the babies she had lost, and James would hold her while she cried. "I am sorry," she would whisper against his chest. "I am sorry I cannot give you children." "Stop apologizing for something that is not your fault," James would say firmly. "I told you from the beginning I chose you knowing we would not have children. That has not changed, and it never will." In the summer of their second year of marriage, a young couple arrived at the ranch looking for work. The man, whose name was Daniel, was a skilled carpenter. His wife, Mary, was 8 months pregnant and exhausted from traveling. They had been heading to California when their wagon broke down, and they had nowhere else to go. James hired Daniel immediately, giving the couple a small cabin that had been used for storage. Catherine helped Mary get settled, providing her with clean linens and food. The younger woman was only 22, just a few years older than Charlie, and she reminded Catherine painfully of herself at that age, full of hope and anticipation for the baby to come. "Thank you for your kindness," Mary said, settling heavily into a chair. "We were afraid no one would hire us with me being in this condition. Most people do not want the trouble." "There is no trouble," Catherine assured her. "We are glad to have you both." A month later, Mary went into labor in the middle of the night. Catherine was woken by Daniel pounding on their door, his face pale with panic. "Please, Mrs. Cordell, Mary needs help. The baby is coming, and I do not know what to do." Catherine dressed quickly and hurried to the cabin. Mary was in hard labor, her face contorted with pain. Catherine had never delivered a baby herself, but she had been present for enough births to know the basics. She sent Daniel for hot water and clean towels, then settled in to help. The labor was long and difficult. For hours, Catherine coached and encouraged Mary, wiping her face with cool cloths and holding her hand through the contractions. When dawn broke, the baby finally came, a squalling, red-faced boy who announced his arrival to the world with a healthy cry. Catherine cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Mary's arms. The young mother looked down at her son with tears of joy streaming down her face, and Catherine felt her own eyes well up in response. There was something so beautiful about this moment, so pure and perfect, even though it also hurt in ways she could not fully articulate. "What will you name him?" Catherine asked softly. "James," Mary said, looking up at Catherine with a smile. "After your husband, who gave us a place when we had none. James Daniel Cooper." Catherine's throat tightened with emotion. "That is a wonderful name." When she finally left the cabin, the sun was fully up and the ranch was coming to life. James was waiting for her on the porch, concern etched in his features. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately. "Everything is fine," Catherine said. "Mary had a boy, they are both healthy." "Thank God," James said. Then, looking more closely at Catherine's face, he added, "Are you all right?" Catherine wanted to say yes, to brush off his concern and pretend everything was fine. But she was tired of pretending, tired of carrying the weight of her grief alone. "It is hard," she admitted. "Seeing them so happy, knowing I will never have that, it is harder than I expected." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I know, I am sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Catherine said. "This is just how things are." "That does not mean it does not hurt," James said. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Catherine, I love you. I love our life together. I love waking up next to you every morning and going to sleep with you every night. I love the way you sing while you cook and the way you scrunch up your nose when you are concentrating. I love everything about you and nothing will ever change that, not the fact that we do not have children, not anything." "I love you too," Catherine whispered. "So much." They stood there on the porch, holding each other as the sun climbed higher in the sky. It was not a perfect moment, because life was not perfect. But it was real and it was theirs, and that was enough. As the months passed, Catherine found herself growing closer to Mary and baby James. The young mother often brought the baby to the main house, and Catherine would hold him while Mary helped with the sewing or other household tasks. It was bittersweet, feeling the weight of a baby in her arms, but it was also healing in a way Catherine had not expected. One afternoon, as Catherine was rocking little James to sleep, Mary spoke hesitantly. "Mrs. Cordell, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Catherine said. "And please call me Catherine. Daniel and I have been talking," Mary said. "And we want you to know that if anything ever happened to us, we would want you and Mr. Cordell to raise our son. We have no family, no one else in the world. But we see how you are with James, how much you love him even though he is not yours. We cannot think of anyone better to care for him if we were gone." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "That is a great honor, Mary. I hope it never comes to that, but if it did, we would love him as our own." "I know you would," Mary said simply. "That is why we chose you." Catherine told James about the conversation that evening. He was quiet for a long moment, then took her hand. "How would you feel about that?" he asked. "If something did happen to Daniel and Mary and we ended up raising their son," scared, Catherine admitted, but also grateful for the chance. "I know he would not truly be ours, but he would be a child who needed us. And I think I could love him, maybe already do love him a little." "Then we will cross that bridge if we come to it," James said, "and we will do it together like we do everything else." Fortunately, they did not have to cross that bridge. Daniel and Mary thrived on the ranch and little James grew strong and healthy. But the conversation had opened something up in Catherine, a possibility she had not considered before. There were children in the world who needed homes, children who had lost their parents or been abandoned. Perhaps that was a path she and James could explore. She mentioned it to James one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What would you think about taking in a child who needed a home?" she asked. "Not a baby necessarily, but perhaps an older child, someone who has nowhere else to go." James considered the question seriously. "Is that something you want?" "I think it might be," Catherine said slowly. "I love our life and I am happy with just the two of us, but there is room in our home and in our hearts for a child if the right situation arose. Then we will keep our eyes open," James said, "and if someone comes along who needs us, we will be there." The opportunity came sooner than either of them expected. In the spring of 1881, 3 years after Catherine had first arrived at the ranch, a wagon train passing through the area was attacked by bandits. Most of the travelers escaped, but 2 families were killed, leaving behind a young girl named Emma. She was 9 years old, with dark hair and large brown eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. The sheriff in Silver Ridge brought her to the ranch, knowing that James and Catherine had expressed interest in helping children who needed homes. "She does not have anyone," the sheriff said quietly while Emma waited in the wagon. "Her parents are dead, and there are no other relatives we can find. If no one takes her in, she will have to go to an orphanage in Santa Fe." Catherine looked at the small figure sitting alone in the wagon, her shoulders hunched and her face blank with grief. She knew that look, had worn it herself after losing her parents. Without thinking, she walked over to the wagon and climbed up beside Emma. "My name is Catherine," she said gently. "I am very sorry about your parents." Emma did not respond, but a single tear rolled down her cheek. "I lost my parents too when I was not much older than you," Catherine continued. "I know how much it hurts, but I also know that the pain does not last forever. It changes, becomes something you can carry without it crushing you." Emma turned to look at her, those big brown eyes searching Catherine's face. "You promise?" "I promise," Catherine said. "And I promise that if you come stay with me and my husband, we will take care of you, we will keep you safe, and we will love you like you are our own." "Why would you do that?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. "You do not even know me." "Because everyone deserves to be loved," Catherine said simply, "and because we have room in our home and our hearts for you." Emma looked past Catherine to where James stood watching. "Is that your husband?" "It is," Catherine said. "His name is James, and he is the kindest man I have ever known. Would you like to meet him?" Emma nodded hesitantly. Catherine helped her down from the wagon and led her over to James. He crouched down so he was at Emma's eye level, his expression gentle. "Hello, Emma," he said. "I am very pleased to meet you. I know you have been through something terrible, and if you decide to stay with us, I will do everything in my power to make sure you are safe and happy. That is a promise." Emma studied him for a long moment, then asked, "Do you have any other children?" "No," James said honestly, "just you if you choose to stay." "Okay," Emma said softly, "I will stay." And just like that, James and Catherine became parents. The transition was not easy. Emma was grieving and traumatized, prone to nightmares and sudden crying jags. She was also fiercely independent, refusing help even when she clearly needed it. But Catherine and James were patient, giving her space when she needed it and comfort when she would accept it. Slowly, Emma began to heal. She started helping Catherine in the kitchen, learning to cook and bake. She followed James around the ranch, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle. She made friends with little James Cooper, the 2 children playing together while their mothers worked. The ranch hands were wonderful with Emma. Frank carved her a set of wooden animals. Miguel taught her Spanish words and sang her songs from his childhood. Charlie, despite being the youngest of the men, took his role as Emma's protector seriously, always keeping an eye out for her safety. 6 months after Emma arrived, Catherine and James were sitting on the porch after supper when Emma came and sat down between them. She leaned against Catherine and James put his arm around both of them. "I want to call you Mama and Papa," Emma said suddenly, "if that is all right." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. She looked at James and saw her own emotion reflected in his face. "That is more than all right," James said, his voice rough with feeling. "That would make us very happy." "Good," Emma said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I still love my first mama and papa, but I love you too. Is that okay?" "It is more than okay," Catherine said, hugging Emma close. "They will always be your parents, and we would never want you to forget them. But we are your parents too now, and we will always take care of you." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Catherine and James lay in each other's arms and marveled at how their lives had changed. "We are parents," Catherine said wonderingly. "I never thought I would get to say that." "Neither did I," James admitted, "but I cannot imagine our lives without her now." "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, the old fear rising up. "Marrying me, knowing we would not have children of our own." James rolled over so he was looking down at her, his expression serious. "Listen to me, Catherine Cordell. I have never regretted marrying you for even 1 second. Yes, Emma is a blessing, and I am grateful every day that she came into our lives. But even if she had not, even if it had just been the two of us forever, I would still be the happiest man alive. You are my family. You always have been, from the moment I saw you standing outside that saloon and knew I could not let you walk through those doors. Everything else is just extra blessings on top of the greatest blessing I have ever received, which is you." Catherine pulled him down and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," James said. "Always." The years that followed were full and rich. Emma grew into a bright, capable young woman who loved the ranch life as much as her adopted parents did. They formalized the adoption when Emma was 11, making her legally their daughter. She took the Cordell name with pride, and on the day the paperwork was finalized, she told Catherine and James that she was the luckiest girl in the world. When Emma was 13, they took in another child, a boy named Samuel who was 6 years old. His parents had died of fever, and like Emma, he had no other family. Samuel was quieter than Emma had been, but he responded well to the stability and love of the Cordell household. Emma took him under her wing, teaching him to ride and helping him with his lessons. The ranch continued to prosper. James's breeding program produced some of the finest horses in the territory, and buyers came from as far as Texas to purchase his stock. Catherine's garden grew larger every year, and she started selling her preserves and pickles in town. The money she made went into a fund for Emma's and Samuel's futures, ensuring they would have opportunities when they grew up. Frank retired when he turned 65, though he stayed on the ranch in a small cabin James built for him. Miguel got married to a girl from town, and James gave them land to build their own house on the edge of the property. Charlie eventually left to start his own ranch, but he visited often, and he always said that everything he knew about ranching he had learned from James Cordell. In 1887, when Emma was 15 and Samuel was 8, Catherine discovered to her absolute shock that she was pregnant. It should have been impossible. The doctor had said it was impossible, but there she was, undeniably carrying a child, and she did not know whether to be overjoyed or terrified. She told James first on a warm evening in June. They were alone in the house, Emma and Samuel having gone to stay overnight with the Coopers. "I am pregnant," she said bluntly, unable to think of a gentle way to break the news. James stared at her. "But the doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said," Catherine interrupted. "But I am telling you I am pregnant. I have all the signs, and I am 2 months late with my courses." James sat down heavily, looking stunned. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Catherine said. "James, I am scared. What if I lose this baby too? What if the pregnancy kills me? I am 39 years old. That is too old to be having a first baby." "You are not having a first baby," James pointed out. "You are having a third baby. Emma and Samuel might not have come from your body, but they are yours just as much as this one will be." His words steadied her. "You are right, but I am still scared." "So am I," James admitted. He stood and pulled her into his arms. "But we will face this together like we face everything." And whatever happens, we will get through it. Catherine saw the doctor the next week, and he confirmed what she already knew. He was baffled by her pregnancy, having been the same doctor who had told her years ago that she would never carry a child to term again. But he examined her thoroughly and pronounced both her and the baby healthy. "I cannot explain it," he said, shaking his head, "but nature sometimes has a way of surprising us. You will need to take it easy, Mrs. Cordell. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest. Your age and your history put you at higher risk for complications." Catherine followed his advice to the letter. She cut back on her work, letting Emma take over more of the cooking and household tasks. James hovered over her protectively, constantly asking if she needed anything. Emma and Samuel were excited about the prospect of a new sibling, though Samuel was a bit confused about where babies came from. The pregnancy progressed without major complications. Catherine felt better than she had during any of her previous pregnancies, with less nausea and more energy. As her belly grew round with the baby, she found herself cautiously hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. In February of 1888, on a cold winter morning, Catherine went into labor. James sent Frank riding hard for the doctor, while he stayed with Catherine, holding her hand and talking her through the contractions. Emma kept Samuel occupied in the other room, and Mary Cooper came over to help. The labor was shorter than Catherine had expected, only 6 hours from first pain to final push. When the baby finally emerged, crying lustily, the doctor announced, "It is a boy, a healthy, strong boy." Catherine burst into tears, unable to believe it was real. James was crying too, and when the doctor placed their son in Catherine's arms, they both stared down at him in wonder. "We did it," Catherine whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," James corrected, kissing her forehead. "You are amazing." They named him Henry Thomas Cordell, Henry after James's father and Thomas as a middle name that Catherine insisted on. When James questioned whether she really wanted to name their son after her first husband, she shook her head. "I am not naming him after Thomas Hayes," she said firmly. "I am naming him after my father. His name was Thomas too, and he was a good man who deserved to be remembered." Emma and Samuel were besotted with their baby brother. Emma wanted to hold him constantly, and Samuel liked to touch his tiny fingers and marvel at how small they were. The whole ranch celebrated the birth, with even Frank wiping away tears when he first held little Henry. As the weeks passed and Henry thrived, Catherine began to truly believe that this miracle was real. She had been given something she thought was forever lost, and the joy of it was almost overwhelming. But it also made her reflect on how far she had come, from that desperate woman standing outside a saloon to this, a woman surrounded by love and family. One evening, when Henry was about 2 months old, Catherine and James were sitting on the porch watching the sunset while Henry slept in her arms. Emma and Samuel were playing near the barn, their laughter carrying on the wind. "Do you remember the day we met?" Catherine asked. "Every detail," James said. "You looked so lost and scared, but also so determined. I knew right then that you were someone special." "I thought you were crazy for offering me a job," Catherine admitted. "No one gives a strange woman a chance like that, but you did, and you changed my entire life." "You changed mine too," James said. "Before you came, this was just a place I worked. You made it a home, made me understand what it means to have a family." Catherine looked down at Henry, then over at Emma and Samuel, then finally at James. "He left me because I could not give him sons," she said softly. "That is what I told you that first day, and do you remember what you said?" "I said I would rather have you," James replied, reaching over to take her free hand. "And I meant it then, and I mean it now. Even with Henry, even with this miracle, you are what matters most to me. You always have been." "I know," Catherine said. "And that is why this is so perfect, because I know you do not love me more now that I have given you a son. You love me exactly the same as you did before, and that means everything." "Actually, I love you more now," James said with a grin. Because now I have had a few more years to fall deeper in love with you, and I plan to keep falling for the rest of my life." Catherine laughed, the sound full of pure joy. "You are a hopeless romantic, James Cordell." "Only for you," he said, leaning over to kiss her gently so as not to disturb the sleeping baby. As the years continued to unfold, the Cordell family grew and changed. Emma fell in love with a young rancher named Robert when she was 19, and James and Catherine gave them their blessing to marry. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the county in attendance. Emma and Robert built a house on a portion of the ranch land that James gifted them. And when they had their first child, a daughter they named Catherine, the new grandmother cried happy tears. Samuel grew up to be a skilled horseman, with a particular talent for training difficult animals. He took over James's breeding program when he turned 20, and under his guidance, the Cordell horses became even more sought after. Samuel never married, content with his life on the ranch and his close relationship with his family. Henry was a bright, curious child who loved books as much as he loved riding. He reminded Catherine of her father, always asking questions and wanting to learn everything about everything. When he was 10, she started teaching him from the books her father had left her, and she discovered that she loved teaching. She began offering lessons to other children in the area and soon had a small school running out of the ranch house. James continued to run the ranch with the same dedication he had always shown. But as he got older, he gradually turned over more of the daily operations to Samuel and the other men. He never fully retired, though, claiming that he would work until the day he died because that was who he was. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, James surprised Catherine with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had been to a big city, and they spent a week marveling at the sights, eating in fine restaurants and shopping for gifts to bring home to their children and grandchildren. On their last night in the city, they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, watching the sun set over the water. Catherine leaned against James, feeling perfectly content. "Thank you for this," she said. "It has been wonderful." "You deserve wonderful," James said. "You deserve everything good in this world." "I already have everything good," Catherine said. "I have you and our children and our home. What more could I possibly want?" "Nothing, I hope," James said, "because I am fresh out of surprises." Catherine laughed and turned in his arms, looking up at him. His hair was graying now and there were lines around his eyes, but to her he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Do you ever think about that day, the day we met, all the time?" James admitted. "I think about how close you came to walking into that saloon and how different our lives would be if you had." "I would not have survived that life," Catherine said quietly. "I would have destroyed myself within a year." "But you did not," James said firmly. "You made the right choice and you have built a beautiful life. We have built it together." "Yes," Catherine agreed, "we have." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had found each other when they both needed saving, and who had spent 20 years proving that love was not about perfection, but about choosing each other every single day. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted with a surprise party organized by their children. Emma had brought little Catherine and her new baby brother James. Samuel had decorated the house with wildflowers. Henry had written a poem about his parents' love story. Even the ranch hands, some of whom had been with James for over 20 years, joined in the celebration. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Catherine and James sat on the porch of their home, the same home that Catherine had first walked into 20 years ago as a desperate woman with nowhere else to go. "I cannot believe it has been 20 years, Catherine said. "Best 20 years of my life," James said immediately. "Mine too," Catherine agreed, "though the first few years were rough." "They were," James acknowledged, "but we got through them." "We got through them because of you," Catherine said. "Because you saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. Because you chose me just as I was with all my flaws and failures." "Those were not flaws," James said. Those were wounds, and there is a difference. You were wounded by life, by Thomas, by circumstances beyond your control. But you were never flawed, you were always perfect to me. Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. Even after 20 years, James still had the ability to say exactly what she needed to hear. I love you so much. I love you too, James said, pulling her close. Forever and always. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. James's joints grew stiff with arthritis, and he finally had to admit that he could no longer do the physical work he once had. Samuel took over as the primary manager of the ranch, with James serving as an advisor. Catherine's school grew, and she eventually hired a young woman from town to help with the teaching. Henry went away to college in the East, studying law, but he promised to return to New Mexico after graduation. In 1905, when Catherine was 57 and James was 59, they celebrated the marriage of their grandson James Cooper to a lovely young woman named Sarah. The wedding was held at the ranch, just as Emma's had been, and 3 generations of the Cordell family gathered to celebrate. During the reception, Catherine found herself standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching all the people she loved talking and laughing and celebrating. James came up beside her and slipped his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Catherine said. "I am thinking about that woman who stood outside the saloon in Silver Ridge in 1878, certain her life was over. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that she would find love and family and happiness beyond anything she could imagine." "You do not need to tell her," James said gently. "She figured it out on her own. She took a chance on a stranger offering her a job, and she built a life from nothing. That takes courage and strength, Catherine. That has always been you." "I could not have done it without you," Catherine said. "Maybe not," James agreed, "but I could not have done any of this without you either. We were always meant to find each other, I think, 2 broken people who put each other back together." "We were not broken," Catherine said thoughtfully. "We were just unfinished, and we finished each other." James smiled and kissed her temple. "I like that better." They stood there together, watching their family celebrate, and Catherine felt a sense of peace and completion that she had never experienced before. Her life had not turned out the way she had planned when she was young. It had been harder, more painful, full of losses and disappointments. But it had also been richer and deeper and more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. She had been told she was worthless because she could not give her husband sons. But James had shown her that her worth had nothing to do with her ability to bear children. She was valuable simply because she existed, because she was herself. That lesson had changed everything. In 1910, James fell ill with pneumonia. For 3 weeks, he battled the infection while Catherine sat by his bedside, refusing to leave. Their children took turns sitting with them, and the house was always full of family. On the worst days, when James's breathing was labored and his fever spiked, Catherine would talk to him, reminding him of their life together, of all the reasons he had to keep fighting. "Remember the day we met." She would whisper, holding his hand. "You said you would rather have me than a dozen sons. You said I was enough. Well, you are enough for me too, James Cordell. You are everything, and I need you to stay with me. I am not ready to let you go." James pulled through, though the illness left him weakened. He never fully regained his strength, and from that point on, he was mostly confined to the house. But his mind remained sharp, and he continued to run the ranch from his chair on the porch, with Samuel and the other men coming to him for advice and decisions. Catherine adjusted to their new normal, spending more time with James and less time on other activities. She read to him in the evenings, and they would talk for hours about their life, their children, their regrets, and their joys. It was a peaceful time, despite James's declining health, a time to reflect and appreciate all they had built together. On a warm evening in June of 1912, 34 years after they first met, James and Catherine sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their nightly ritual, this quiet time together as the day faded into night. "I have been thinking," James said slowly. About what happens after I am gone. James, Catherine started, but he shook his head. Let me say this, please. I know I am not going to live forever, and I want to make sure you know how grateful I am for the life we have shared. You made every day better just by being in it. You made me a better man. You were already a good man, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. You were the best man. I was a lonely rancher before you, James said with a slight smile. You turned me into a husband and a father. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just building a ranch. Everything good in my life has come from you. And everything good in my life has come from you, Catherine said. You saved me, James. You saw me at my lowest point, and instead of judging me or turning away, you offered me hope. I will never forget that. I did not save you, James said firmly. You saved yourself. I just gave you the opportunity. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. Catherine held James's hand, feeling the familiar calluses and the thin skin that came with age. This hand had held hers through so much, through joy and sorrow, through triumph and tragedy. This hand had built a life with her, built a home and a family and a legacy. You have any regrets? Catherine asked suddenly. Only one, James said. I regret that I do not have more years to spend with you. 100 years would not be enough. No, Catherine agreed. It would not. James lived for 2 more years, passing away peacefully in his sleep on a cool October morning in 1914. He was 68 years old, and he left behind a wife, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county, testament to the respect and affection people had for James Cordell. Catherine stood at the graveside with her family around her, and she felt both profound grief and profound gratitude. Grief for the loss of the man who had been her partner and her love for 36 years. Gratitude for every single day they had been given together. In the months after James's death, Catherine struggled to find her footing. The ranch felt empty without him, even though it was still full of family. She found herself drawn to the porch every evening, sitting in their chairs and watching the sunset alone. Sometimes Emma or Samuel would join her, but often she preferred the solitude, the chance to feel close to James in the places they had shared. One evening, about 6 months after James died, Catherine was sitting on the porch when Henry came to join her. He was 36 now, a successful lawyer in Santa Fe, but he had come home to spend some time with his mother. How are you doing, Mama? He asked, settling into James's chair. I am managing, Catherine said. Some days are better than others. I remember you telling me once about how you and Papa met, Henry said. About how you were standing outside that saloon and he offered you a job. You said he told you he would rather have you than a dozen sons. That was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. Catherine smiled through her tears. It was romantic. Your father was a romantic man, though he would have denied it. He loved you so much, Henry said. We all saw it every day, the way he looked at you, the way he always made sure you were happy. He set an impossible standard for the rest of us. He was a good man, Catherine agreed. The best I ever knew. You know what I think? Henry said. I think you saved each other. Papa always said you saved him from a lonely life, but he saved you too. You were both exactly what the other needed. Yes, Catherine said, we were. And you built something beautiful together, Henry continued. This ranch, this family, all of it came from the love you and Papa shared. That is a legacy, Mama. That is something that will last long after we are all gone. Catherine looked out at the ranch, at the land that she and James had worked together, at the house they had filled with love and laughter. Henry was right. They had built something beautiful, something lasting. And even though James was gone, that beauty remained. Thank you, she told Henry. I needed to hear that. I know, he said, reaching over to take her hand. And I need you to know that we are all here for you, Mama. You are not alone. I know, Catherine said. I have always known that. Catherine lived for another 15 years after James's death, dying peacefully at the age of 82 in 1929. In those years, She saw the ranch continue to thrive under Samuel's management. She saw Emma become a grandmother herself and Henry become a respected judge. She taught school until her health no longer permitted it, and even then she tutored children from her porch. On her last day, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Catherine reflected on the long, strange journey her life had taken. From the desperate abandoned wife standing outside a saloon in 1878 to this, a woman surrounded by love and family at the end of a long, well-lived life. "Tell me the story again, Grandma," one of her great-granddaughters asked, "about how you and Grandpa met." Catherine smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I was standing outside a saloon in Silver Ridge," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I had nowhere to go and no prospects. My first husband had left me because I could not give him sons, and I thought my life was over. But then a tall cowboy walked up to me and offered me a job, and when I told him about my situation, he said something I never forgot. He said he would rather have me than a dozen sons, and he meant it, and he proved it every day for the next 36 years. That is how I met your great-grandfather, and that is how my real life began." The little girl listened with wide eyes, enchanted by the story. Catherine looked around at all the faces surrounding her, all the people who existed because she had taken a chance on that tall cowboy all those years ago. All the love and life and beauty that had come from that one moment of faith. "Remember," she said, her voice growing weaker, "your worth is not determined by what you can or cannot do. Your worth is inherent simply because you exist. I learned that from your great-grandfather, and it is the most important lesson I ever received." Those were the last words Catherine Cordell spoke. She died that evening, with the last rays of the setting sun streaming through her window, surrounded by the family she and James had created together. At her funeral, Henry stood to give the eulogy. He spoke of his mother's strength and courage, of her kindness and her resilience. He spoke of how she had turned tragedy into triumph, how she had built a life from nothing. And he spoke of the great love story between his parents, a story that had shaped all of their lives. "My father used to say that my mother saved him," Henry concluded, "but the truth is, they saved each other. And in doing so, they gave all of us the greatest gift possible, the gift of a family built on real love, unconditional love, the kind of love that does not depend on perfection or performance. That is the legacy they left us, and it is a legacy we should strive to honor every day of our lives." Catherine was buried next to James on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that bore their names and dates, but also bore a single line that Henry had chosen. They found each other when they needed saving, and they spent a lifetime proving that love is always enough. The Cordell Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Samuel's line. The story of James and Catherine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The lesson they had taught, that a person's worth is inherent and not dependent on what they can produce or provide, became a core family value. And on warm summer evenings, when the sun set over the New Mexico landscape in shades of orange and gold, it was said that if you sat very quietly on the porch of the old ranch house, you could almost hear the echo of two voices, talking and laughing together. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and who had built something beautiful that would last forever. Their love story had started with rejection and despair, with a woman who thought she was worthless and a man who saw her true value. It had grown into something strong and lasting, something that had created not just a family but a legacy. And in the end, it proved what Catherine and James had always known in their hearts, that when you find the right person, the person who loves you for who you are and not for what you can give them, you have found the greatest treasure that exists in this world. Thomas Hayes had left Catherine because she could not give him sons. But James Cordell had said he would rather have Catherine, and he had meant it with every fiber of his being. And in choosing each other, in building a life together based on mutual respect and unconditional love, They had created something far more valuable than any number of sons could ever be. They had created a home, a family, and a love story that would be remembered and cherished long after they were both gone. That was their legacy, and it was more than enough.